Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar session. Our topic today is prioritizing educator well-being as key element of development, evaluation, and engagement. But the first day of school being just around the corner, it can bring excitement, but also some uncertainty and probably a little bit more than a little stress. From start to finish, the entire school year could be quite a roller coaster for your teachers and staff members, which makes mental health a critical priority for your district. We hope that this webinar session today will be helpful for you to feel better prepared to support your colleagues throughout this school year. And we are very excited to have you joining us today. My name is Natasha Safronova, and I am Director of Product Marketing here at Sogo Survey. I will be moderating today's conversation with my colleagues, Melissa Kratt and Ian Crowley, as they will reflect on their past school year and also explore meaningful ways to prioritize educators' well-being as key element of development, evaluation, and engagement, which is obviously our topic today. Collectively, Melissa and Ian have over 20 years of experience in teaching students, training educators, implementing technology solutions for community engagement, including, of course, teacher engagement in districts across the country. And before we get the goal of today's session, right? We are going to learn and discuss how to make well-being check-ins regular part of your district's processes, the components of effective evaluation process, how to ask staff members the right questions to really encourage that open and honest answers. We will give you 3 mental health questions that are good to incorporate in your engagement surveys. Also, how to connect the dots between evaluations, engagement, and professional development, and how to partner with teachers on evaluation and making sure that it's a collaborative process in your district. But before we get started, I really want to go over a few housekeeping details to make sure that we all have the best webinar experience possible. As you may have already noticed, all attendees are muted by default. But if you have a question or a comment at any time during this webinar, please use the Q&A widget in the bottom of your screen and just ask your question, put your comment there, and then I will make sure to bring it up with our presenters at the earliest opportunity. We are going to have a dedicated Q&A time at the end of the webinar, so we will make sure to definitely address all the questions there. Also, if you experience any technical difficulties, you could not see or hear anything, just send me a quick message in chat and I'll do what I could to help you. And with that, let's get started. I'm going to pass it now to our first presenter, Melissa.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you all for joining us today. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. My background is in the world of education, and in my current life, I work a lot with school districts, but also organizations around the world in prioritizing employee experience. And sometimes we see there's a little bit of a divide, but there's a huge overlap today in what we're talking about. So I'm pretty excited about this topic. So first of all, we're talking about well-being as a part of your check-in process. And so stepping back, what do we even mean by check-ins? If you think to yourself about the school district that you're in, the organization you're in right now, how frequently are your teachers getting a regular check-in? And if so, who are they checking in with? Is it with their colleagues in their departments, department heads, school leaders, leaders in their curricular areas, or at the district level as well too? And what's the purpose of these check-ins? In other words, what's being checked? Why are we checking in? What's the goal of all of these check-ins? It's great to say, oh yeah, we're in close contact. We have regular check-ins, but what's the point of these check-ins? Are they just, sort of a touch base kind of thing? Or is there some sort of goal involved? Of course, right now it's back to school. So there's a lot of curricular workshops that have been wrapping up, a lot of new trainings based on protocols or changes that are happening in districts and schools across the country right now. Obviously, a lot of changes going on, a lot to keep up with on the training side of front, but also thinking about throughout the entire school year, what are those check-ins that people have? Very frequently we think about, maybe the sort of, faculty meetings on a monthly basis. Like, that's a good check-in, but that's not necessarily individual. When we start to think about the individual level, we're also often thinking about evaluation. So the performance evaluation. Is this a year when I have someone in my own classroom checking me out, seeing what's going on with my students or not? How does that work virtually? A lot of questions as well. But thinking about how frequently those check-ins happen, you might think of them as touch points in the employee experience, but touch points, those mapped points, some of those are the threads of big group meetings, some of them are curricular, some of them are personal and individual as well. In schools, of course, we prioritize student success. We want to make sure that every student has their path toward graduation, toward college and career readiness, all of those pieces that we're looking for. We have guidance counselors. We have people whose jobs are to prioritize and look after our students. Of course, that's why they're there. But we're also thinking about here, how do we make sure that we put those same sort of safeguards and processes and practices in place to ensure teacher success? So when we look at the next slide, I just want to touch on this idea of well-being. What do we even mean by well-being? And admittedly, well-being is a little bit of a soft, it's not a very hard definition, I would say. CDC pulls a guideline that we often hear from, an organization we often hear from these days. But here we're thinking about positive emotion, lack of negative emotion as well, of course. Satisfaction with your life, fulfillment, things are going well, positive functioning. All of these are the kinds of things that we're thinking about when we measure well-being, which frankly are pretty soft, pretty subjective. Something that your current state and my current state, we might have the exact kind of situations happening in our lives parallel, but we might have a different state of well-being. So this is a very difficult measure to incorporate in any kind of study and any kind of research. But unfortunately, we know mental health is a significant challenge for many individuals and for many organizations. And there's been a lot of trend in this area as well. When we look at 2020, a Gallup poll showed that 34% of people described their mental health as excellent, which was down from 43% just the year before. No surprises, a lot of stuff happening in 2020. And this isn't specific to teachers. This is, of course, across lots and lots of industries. Of course, also related to this is the concern of, if we do bring up mental health, will there be some sort of retaliation if I'm seeking help, or if I'm seeking support, or I'm reaching out to someone to say, hey, things are not going well and I need some help in this situation? 1/3 of workers said that they, across industries again, said that they're concerned about the fear of that retaliation. If I bring this topic up in the first place, that could look bad for me. Remember, well-being, just like engagement, it's broadly defined, but it's really the foundation for all of the things that we're talking about here today. So one of the ways that we look at, on the next slide here, one of the ways that we look at well-being is often with regard to sort of broadly defined work-life balance. And we know work-life balance is a significant challenge. Today I'm in the office, sometimes we're working from home, of course, all of us in and out of virtual classrooms, real classrooms, Zoom or not. There's a significant challenge to finding balance in our lives, which of course leads to an increase in hours worked and then also an increase in burnout. In fall 2020, so a year ago, but things have been up and down since then. Fall 2020, 60% of teachers reported burnout as a major concern, which is up from just 25% earlier in that same year. So more than double in the same year, 2020. So are things getting better this year? We absolutely hope so. But knowing that work-life balance is one of those kind of things to say, you and I are different people. We have different personalities. We have different workloads. We have different goals. We have different levels of students, for example. So there's a lot of complex measures in here, but checking in to find out how people are going, how people are doing, it has a lot more to do with than just metrics. So with that conversation in the back of our mind, we start to look at what are those check-ins that we're doing throughout the course of the year, which brings us to the next slide, which is evaluation processes. So when we think of evaluation, very often this is based on successful adherence to standards and objectives. So looking at the curriculum, looking at the goals in a professional development plan, for example. But really, when we're thinking about this, we're going to come back to mental health and well-being in a moment. But when you step back and think about your evaluation process that exists right now, very frequently, that's the most regular check-in that educators have over the course of a year. They know there's maybe 1 or 2 different lessons someone's going to observe, or maybe it's not an observation year, so they're not going to get observed. They're going to get more of a generalized piece of professional feedback as well. So thinking about the current process that you have in place in your district, just take a moment and think about it. Does this process work as intended, first of all, as well? What is actually being evaluated, and how prepared are the people doing the evaluation? Of course, there's a reason for evaluation, just like there's a reason for assessment. Are we adhering to these standards? Are students being successful in achieving these objectives? Wherever your curriculum is coming from, that's what we're assessing against. And in the same way, we're assessing assessing educators along with that evaluation to find out, are we achieving our goals? Unfortunately, what can happen too is those people who are doing the evaluation might not understand the entire process, which is also true of those being evaluated. So when you step back and you think about your current process, and on the next slide, we have a big sort of high level, nice little cycle put together by the National Comprehensive Center for Teacher Quality. As a really great study about the relationship between teacher evaluation and professional development, which is focused on teaching and learning, of course. So you'll notice that this one starts with, again, teaching standards, which is, of course, no surprise. That's what we're all working toward adhering to. Looking for multiple measures. How are we figuring out teacher performance? Is it based on achieving national board certification or additional credentials or certifications or degrees, for example? There can be a lot of different components that can be used to incorporate a view of someone's performance, not to mention, of course, classroom observations, involvement in activities, can be student feedback as well in some places, scores. I've tried AP classes, for example, AP course scores, for example, can be part of that evaluation process. So multiple measures. Obviously, a piece of that too is making sure that there's good training, that everyone knows what it means to me, to get a 4 or to get a 5 on a particular scale. Are those scales well defined? So looking at what the actual process that you have in place, how it's set up, is it actually aligned with those standards? Does it actually incorporate multiple measures? And do people understand what those are? Because if those people are providing feedback that's not aligned, it's not going to be helpful. It's not going to be supportive. And then, of course, we're leading those towards the ideal situation is that leads to and informs professional development. We have that goal, we have that professional development because we want to adhere to those professional learning standards, which again, goes back to that idea of standards. So again, what we can see is a lot of this has to do with those teaching standards, which have a lot to do often with curricular standards, which makes sense, of course, because that's what has the biggest impact on students, is making sure those students are able to achieve their objectives and goals as well. But what we start to think about here in this conversation, bringing it back together, is what about the impact of those elements that are not assessed? So I say there are a lot of pieces that are happening in the classroom, beyond the classroom on a daily basis that are not part of this conversation, but do have a huge impact on the teacher experience as an employee, as a colleague, but also as someone who influences the experience of students as well. So we look at this next point here, it brings us into having that conversation. When we look back at that map on the next slide here, when we look back at that map of how many checkpoints we have over the course of the year, we're talking about on the next slide, how to ask questions that encourage open and honest answers. So again, this is an ongoing conversation. When you start to think about, oh, well, maybe that evaluation is the only time that teachers are getting that one-on-one check-in or that one-on-one feedback. Are those the questions that we're really intending to ask? Are they the most useful questions? How many of those questions are structured? How many of them are open? What is the goal when we're working on these pieces? When we have this really nice set of standards, which of course, are evaluated to match our objectives. I would like to say too, like there are a lot of checkpoints that we can do on our own evaluation systems. And then we're going to actually share with you a rubric on that one, because I love rubrics and I think they're a really great tool for education and sort of evaluation. So when you evaluate your own system, are you setting up the opportunities for encouraging open and honest conversations? In some cases, this is, and I know Ian will talk about this a little bit later as well too, sometimes this is the big picture. This is more of an engagement study. Let's see what's going on. Let's see how people are, likely to be retained, are likely to be successful in their jobs, are likely to stick around for the next few years. Sometimes it's that balance, that big picture, And sometimes it is individual. We want to know how is this person specifically doing. If I find out that English teachers are performing extremely well, that's great. Of course, that's good news. Maybe it's something that I don't need to take action on. But if I find out that there's a lot of concerns about performance or communication or a particular issue in a certain school, maybe I want to be able to act on that at the school level to find out what resources or what improvements we can make in that area too. So thinking about the objectives that you have every time you're reaching out, what's the point? Like, it would be nice to say, like, oh, I just wanted to stop by and see how people are doing, see how things are going. And that's great. That's often, the nicest thing to be able to do, to have those meaningful conversations with people. Just simply ask them, how's it going? But especially when more and more of the world is in a virtual or hybrid environment, it means that we need to be a lot more intentional with those outreaches to make the most of every time we're reaching out to ask a question, finding out what's going to enable that meaningful follow-up. Because of course, yeah, we'd like to say that we care about people, and of course that we do, but you never want to create that impression that you care so much that it seems like nosy or prying. You want to make sure that there's a reason that you're asking. It's good to be friends, it's good to be friendly, but from a professional perspective, start to think about, if I find out this kind of information, what can I do about it? How can I follow up on it? Is it even appropriate for me to follow up in this situation? Are we setting this up as an anonymous reporting structure? Or is this something that we're going to be able to follow up on with people individually? So I've just put together a few of those best practices on the next slide here. And some of those are the things that we would talk about in a survey, of course, in a focus group, in any conversation, any professional or counseling type situation, a personal or professional development situation. We have good intentions. And that's, of course, why you're here. It's why we're having this conversation as well, too. We always want the best for the people. We're reaching out for people. Ideally, of course, we're reaching out to support them, to help them to be successful. Unfortunately, sometimes it does happen that the opposite is true. But what we're looking for is, of course, on the left, leading with empathy. I'm on your side. I want to understand your experience. I want to know what you're going through so I can help support you, so I can help you to be more successful. Keeping it simple, of course. Sometimes we get into the situation where, should you ask people or should you wait for them to tell you? Sometimes keeping it simple, giving a simple starting question, which I'll come back to again in a moment, is all you need. There are some people that you ask, how's it going? And they will tell you everything that's going on. Sometimes a little bit too much information. But when you start by keeping it simple too, it allows you to appear to be less intrusive, less complicated in their lives. Avoiding bias. You're amazing today, right? Everything's great, right? So bias in asking questions is a significant challenge that we try to avoid. Keeping things neutral, allowing people to share their feedback, and then listening and actually asking those feedback questions as well too. If you don't ask the question, you can't listen. But the worst thing to do is to ask the question and not listen to the answer at all. How you doing? Okay, great. We've all had those moments where we say, how's it going? You're just passing someone in the hall. You're not really asking for a genuine answer. You're just expecting them to wave back at you. But definitely being able to listen to what's being told to you is really, really important. So obviously the opposite is all of those things. Leading with curiosity. Again, it's from a good place. It's a good-hearted thing to do. How's it going? No, tell me more. How's everything in your life? Prying can be a little bit more prying. It becomes overcomplicated when you start to get into people's personal details. Even if they've chosen to tell you something personally, maybe they'll later regret it. So let them make that decision about the kind of information that they want to share with you. Don't slant your questions. Don't set those up that there's a clear judgment attached with their answers. Being able to listen at a neutral point with that stated objective of, I'm here to help you, I'm here to support you, super important. And also not telling or prescribing to them, this is how you should do everything. I know everything, so let me tell you about it. Nobody likes to be told what to do. So listening and finding out what people have to say is absolutely the best advice in this area. So that is a lot of advice, a lot of things added on this list. So Natasha, I'm going to turn back to you to see what people think might be useful.
Great, thank you, Melissa. I am going to put a quick poll here on the screen that you should be able to see on your screen now. So the question that we wanted to ask you is, what is currently included in your performance evaluations of your teachers, of your educators? This is multi-choice question, so please choose all that apply. Is this classroom performance, communication skills, professional growth, leadership skills, subject matter expertise, tech proficiency, especially in the hybrid or distance learning environment, that becomes quite a priority. And also personal well-being, something that we really focus today on. So given the current system that you have in place, what are those answers? We are just going to, I see some answers coming in. I'm going to give a few more seconds for everybody to be able to respond. And then I am going to close the poll and we are going to look at our results now. You should be able to see them on your screen. And Melissa, back at you.
Yeah.
Any surprises?
I would say it's very sad to see the bottom of this slide piece, of course. No kidding. Classroom performance, how well you communicate leadership, knowing what you're talking about in the first place. I think tech, as you mentioned too, like it's a very recent thing for some people, and tech or tools might be different in different areas or different sort of subject matter areas, but clearly highlights the thing that we're pointing out at the bottom, which is personal well-being. You know, it's not something that we're judging people on, but it's something that is a measure of a holistic performance. And it definitely has a huge impact on ourselves as educators, as colleagues, and of course, as students as well. So I know Ian has a few things to add to that. So let me transfer over to him for the next piece.
I certainly do. Thank you, Melissa and Natasha, for the introduction. And I think Melissa touched on a lot of great points. What I'm going to be talking about is examples of how to introduce mental health questioning into different situations. When we talk about engagement, when we talk about pulse surveys or regular check-ins. So we'll provide some examples there. But first, I'd like to touch on recent trends in terms of the perception of mental health and maybe the stigma associated with mental health and how that's prioritized and viewed in the workplace in today's environment. And a recent study of 12,000 employees, managers, leaders around the world found that up to 89% of participants said that their mental health was negatively impacted by the pandemic. Now, that's not a super surprising result, of course, and the emergence of COVID-19 and other factors have certainly brought mental health to the forefront of the discussion and to the forefront of workplace agendas as well. It's not all doom and gloom, of course. There are silver linings here. So now more than ever, employers are investing significantly when it comes to supporting employee mental health, and they do that through various efforts. Mental health training initiatives, benefits, staff resource groups, and other programs. And while we all recognize the importance of this topic, it's also a sensitive one. So there are things to consider before you start introducing and asking about mental health and well-being to your teachers, staff members, whether it be over the course of your engagement programs or your pulse surveys, regular check-ins, other various efforts to engage with your staff members. So a few things to consider. First is privacy. We talked about this being a sensitive topic. So take measures to ensure the anonymity of your respondents, right? So this is critical to ensuring that teachers are safe and they feel safe in sharing candid feedback to a topic as sensitive as this. And secondly, how are you planning to use the data from an evaluator or administrator role? It should be used as a starting point to understand where the gaps are in your district as it pertains to mental health and well-being. The data should not be used, however, to drill down to a single respondent or make assumptions about specific teachers, staff members, or groups. The ultimate goal really is to understand the current culture, identify those gaps, and make informed decisions about future programs that can be introduced in the district, trainings, and resources to address those gaps. And lastly, accountability. So again, mental health, very sensitive topic. It does require attention and action. And if you're not prepared to follow up on, address, and take action on the data that you collect, it's not in your best interest to implement this line of questioning. So if employees share candid feedback with you and realize no action is taken, it can result in mistrust and negatively impact their engagement. So if we move on to the next slide here. So I want to start with 3 questions that you can consider implementing in your engagement survey. So when we think of this, this is really at the overall district level. This is not a way to personally engage, on a one-on-one basis with staff members or employees. But these are good examples, and each of these individual questions here serves a specific purpose. So the first one we have here is, I feel comfortable talking about my mental health in the workplace. Now, of course, each of these questions is being presented on a 5-point scale here. The goal is to indicate the level of agreement with the statements. So this first one, this gives you an opportunity to capture a baseline of how safe teachers and staff feel discussing mental health in the workplace. And you can consider variations to this question by asking more specific and targeted questions in terms of, how comfortable do you feel talking about your mental health with your supervisor or with the principal or with administration? So this is actionable data that can be used to create more effective and targeted training programs and resources. The second one here is, I have an understanding of what resources are available for mental health in the district. So this one's pretty obvious. This is to understand the awareness level throughout the entire district in terms of the programs and resources that you provide to address mental health or stressors, et cetera. And so it's possible that you're currently offering a variety of different programs and resources, and teachers or staff members may not know they exist. So this is all about generating and understanding that level of awareness, and gives you an opportunity to understand if you need to start prioritizing the communication and advertising these types of programs and resources in a more effective way. And then lastly, here we have, I feel that leadership prioritizes mental health in the district. So this is also a very important question here. So there was a recent study in 2019 that found only 41% of employees felt that mental health was prioritized at their organization. And only 37% viewed their leaders as advocates for mental health at work. So this is definitely a challenge, and there's a gap here. And it's one thing to be aware of the programs and resources available to you, but there can certainly be a sense of reluctancy and hesitation. We talked about past stigmas being associated with mental health, but there can be hesitation to take advantage of these resources if the perception is that the leaders aren't in support, right, or aren't advocates of these programs. So it's critical that your leadership team is vocal in their support of these resources and an advocate for mental health and well-being, because awareness and access to these things is many times not enough. All right, so if we move to the next slide here, now we're going to move from the overall district level more so to a personal approach. And when we talk about that, we're really talking about pulse surveys, regular check-ins with staff members to engage them. This is in a less formal approach, in a more personal way. And a question as simple as this one here, how's it going? Right, allows you to keep your finger on the pulse of how employees are doing and how they're feeling really at any given time. And as we move to the next slide here, this is another great question that you can incorporate into a regular check-in or pulse survey. But open-ended feedback gives you a tremendous opportunity, because you're not limiting participants or employees to specific and targeted questions. You're really opening up the floor for them to share their thoughts or voice concerns with you. And with this approach, again, there's no restrictions. It's really about just opening up the floor so that they can share what's been stressing them over the past week, or what they enjoyed throughout the past week or two, and just share their general well-being with you. And you can easily track and monitor these things over time. As we move to the next section here, I'm going to touch on how to connect the dots between evaluations, professional development, and engagement. And really what we're talking about here is, what happens in between these more formal programs and processes. So evaluations, engagement surveys, engagement specifically, you may be running that once or twice a year. And these are all excellent opportunities to gather meaningful, actionable data. But what about every other day of the year when an evaluation isn't taking place, or I'm not responding to an engagement survey? We know, of course, that issues and concerns can pop up at any time. And so giving your staff members an easy way to express what's on their mind at regular intervals is really a positive within the district. And a very practical approach to this is to implement kind of what we just discussed, which is pulse checks and follow-up. So pulse surveys are really the foundation of what we refer to as a continuous listening strategy. So they provide quick, easy insight into staff sentiment on specific topics, or they can be used to simply gauge how employees are feeling during turbulent times, like we just saw with some of those example questions. And these are regular check-ins. They can be scheduled and even automated weekly, bi-monthly, or monthly, and really allow administrators to keep their finger on the pulse of what staff members are thinking and feeling at any given time. And again, giving them the opportunity to voice their opinions because they may be dealing with things that you're unaware of. And this really opens up the floor for them to share their feedback with you. Secondly, a digital feedback center for teachers, staff, and students, really, all the stakeholders served by the district. So this could be as simple as a form, a tab on your website, a landing page, giving stakeholders and staff members a safe way to share their feedback and reach you 24/7. And this empowers staff members and provides really, again, an open forum for them to ask questions, voice concerns, leave compliments, and that feedback can be rerouted to the appropriate team or team member in the district to determine an appropriate follow-up action. And staff members, when they go to leave their feedback, they can choose to remain anonymous, or they can leave their contact details if further discussion or follow-up is warranted. Now, last but not least here, Natasha, if we move to the next slide, I'd like to touch on partnering with teachers on planning evaluations, reporting results, and making recommendations. So one of the key challenges in any teacher evaluation is the need for teachers, administrators, and evaluators to agree on specific definitions. And by that, I mean what constitutes good or effective teaching. So by partnering with teachers and giving them the opportunity to share their feedback and contribute to the evaluation planning process, that helps ensure everyone is aligned and helps set expectations. And it's really no different from teaming up with teachers to create instruction plans and the overall curriculum for the upcoming school year. And it can really help your district develop effective evaluation and professional development systems to, of course, prioritize the experience of those that you're looking to serve and support, which is your teachers and staff and students. And the first point here is really prioritizing communication and collaboration. So who better to involve in this process than the experts? And those are the teachers. They are experts in their craft. So they should be involved in the design and development process of your evaluation systems. That collaboration helps establish trust and creates positive relationships between teachers and administration rather than pitting them against one another, which we've seen from speaking with different school districts. And you also want to prioritize the communication aspect of that. Make sure you're providing ample opportunity for all staff members who wish to be involved in that development process, rather than hand selecting or hand picking 2 or 3 teachers to help you plan out and design your evaluation program. So think generally about why you're conducting the evaluations in the first place. Higher quality teaching, retaining high quality teachers, improve student learning. Those are all the outcomes that we're hoping for as a result of the evaluations. And involving teachers in that implementation process, it definitely promotes a sense of ownership and drives belief that the programs are being put in place to support them and encourage growth in student learning. Now, complete alignment on evaluation systems, right? So we talked about prioritizing the collaboration and communication, but evaluations are most successful when everybody involved has a full understanding of all the elements of the system. So how they'll be executed, when and by whom. And to ensure there's complete alignment, these are some questions to consider as you think about the implementation process in your district. Does everyone share the same definition of effective teaching, for instance? Are administrators, evaluators, and teachers fully aware of the metrics being used, the rating system, the calculations being used to score and determine the results? And when are evaluations taking place? What is the interval or frequency? Who is responsible for evaluating? Are there other teachers that are involved in the evaluation process? And one of the most important questions is how are those results being used? For instance, what if I get a significantly high or significantly low score? What happens then? So aligning everyone on these questions will ensure a more successful evaluation process. And by partnering with teachers and staff in the development of those systems, you can take a proactive approach to setting the right expectations and making sure that everyone's appropriately aligned. And last but not least here, delivering effective feedback. So the most effective evaluation programs foster a culture that's founded on continuous learning and open dialogue around successes and challenges, and of course, growth opportunities. So effective programs connect those challenges and growth opportunities identified through classroom observation or other mechanisms to specify opportunities for professional development in those areas. And so evaluators need to understand what effective feedback looks like, right? That's one of the most important points, but even more importantly, how to deliver effective feedback. And that's what we're talking about here. This can be both positive and negative, of course. And studies have shown that face-to-face conversations are more impactful than simply providing a written report. And that's not to discount the importance of a written report. Both are critical. It's just that a face-to-face conversation is a bit more meaningful and should be implemented as a complement to written feedback. And ensuring timely, specific, and meaningful feedback to teachers, let's say after an observation, after you are in the classroom, jotting down notes in the back and filling out that evaluation form, to let them know the system is working as intended and to help them improve their craft. And of course, with evaluations, there's always the opportunity for difficult conversations or conflicts to arise. So when we talk about professional development, we're not only talking about, teachers and staff members. Of course, we're talking about evaluators here too, because it's important that they're properly educated and trained through professional development programs and channels so that they know what questions to ask. They have the coaching skills required, and they're equipped to handle those difficult conversations and potential conflicts that we touched on. Right? And that really wraps up my part of the presentation here. So I believe we have another poll question. So I will pass it back to Natasha, and we'll go ahead and administer that poll.
Thanks, Ian. Yes, you're correct. We do have another poll here that I'm going to put on your screens in just 1 second. All right, so you should see it now. And while we have created a poll with this question, basically asking you which items from this webinar are you most likely to act on? And again, this is a multiple choice question, so you could select as many as you want. Really, the main goal here is just for this as a reminder to you, as like a call to action. So you took an action, you attended the webinar, close the loop, use this data and make sure that you are getting into the new year better and stronger. I see the answers are coming in. So we are going to give a few more seconds. We are going to close the poll, and I'm doing it now, and I am bringing the results back on the screen. So we have a winner here. It looks like just making well-being part of the check-in process is something that everybody in this webinar chose, which is really great to see. As with our first poll, we know that this is not really something that is part of the traditional processes that are being in place, and it's really becoming so important to act on it and making sure that we are checking on our educators' well-being and their mental health as part of overall evaluation and overall processes in school. Ian, do you have any comments on the results?
Yeah, I think we've seen tremendous growth throughout the presentation here, because earlier we saw 0% of the attendees were currently incorporating mental health and well-being in the check-in or survey process. So it's glad to see that everyone sees the value in that and recognizes that. And I think, there's no wrong answer here, but it's good to see that 100%, certainly.
Awesome. All right. So now we have time for questions. I've seen a few questions were coming in as the presentation was going. I decided to keep them till the end. So we are going to bring them up now. And for those of you who haven't asked your questions yet, this is perfect opportunity. All right, so we are going to go with our first question. And the first question was, how can I implement a thoughtful evaluation process that promotes staff's well-being and also improves our workflow at the same time? Lisa, yes, please take this one.
Please call on me. I think the most positive way to say this is, of course, everything that you do to improve your processes will improve your organization's workflow, like the district, whether it's at the district level, whether it's the school or classroom level as well too. The alternative is you don't do anything about it and it creates more problems. You have employee churn, you have negative interactions in the classroom or in a school building, for example, which is the worst, or interactions with parents, for example. So the more that you can do to enhance and improve, if you're talking about like the automated processes of, how do you do those check-ins? Like that's something that we talk about a lot too. So we could definitely have that conversation with you as well, setting up systems to make sure there is a systematic approach to that check-in process, pulse checks and stuff like that. But it is absolutely critical to make sure that whatever you do is promoting sort of well-being. I won't say that workflow is obvious, it's an obvious follow-up, but everything that you do in the interest of mental health and well-being is going to have a positive impact on the work that's happening as well.
All right, thanks, Melissa. Let's see, our next question here seems like a very specific use case. So somebody is saying that in the previous district they worked for, evaluations were basically just used as threats and didn't provide much insight or any meaningful discourse. So what are the best ways to make evaluations to be seen as open conversations and less as of a chore?
Yeah, so I can take this one. So I think this was asked before my section. So hopefully I touched on some of the answers here, but it sounds like, it's a really top-down culture in that previous district. And it sounds like a very one-sided conversation, whereas, allowing for opportunity to collaborate and partner with teachers and staff members in the design and implementation of your evaluations programs, it puts everybody on the same page and removes the concern that's being mentioned here. So, that everyone understanding the expectations, the metrics they're being measured on, when and who will be conducting the evaluation, and just a full understanding of all those elements up front, and establishing that true partnership and collaboration. I think it proactively addresses all these things here.
Thanks, Jan. All right, we have time for one more question. And then if there is anything else, we are going to take those and respond to them offline. So our next question is, I'm in a position now where I can create the evaluation process to be what I want to be and what our team needs it to be. So how can I best gather everyone's suggestions and need to make it as collaborative as possible? Melissa? All right, perfect. Robin.
Please, thank you. I think this is an awesome question, of course, because this is, what we'd love to hear is that we're looking for feedback. We're looking for people. So thank you for joining, of course, this session to sort of gather that feedback. There's no wrong way to do this, but Ian's touched on a few of those things that communication and collaboration are important. So it's not enough to say, oh, we reached out, we partnered with teachers, and every teacher in the district says, ooh, did they partner with you? Like, who did they talk to? We've never wanted to be just like something that was like lip service or, yeah, they said they did, but I don't know who they talked to. So the more communication that you can do, some of it is proactive on your part, reaching out, letting people know that you're interested in having that conversation, whether it's at a board meeting, whether it's at a school improvement committee meeting, like any of those kinds of levels that you have, not just at the leadership level, but at curricular levels as well too. The more voices that you can have in that conversation, it's on you a little bit to speak up, let people know that you're looking for that, and then invite that. We love the pulse checks. We love all of those surveys. We love all of that feedback, focus groups too, that always on, sending in that continuous feedback from the digital listening station, that kind of thing. there's no wrong way to have this conversation. So if you have any specifics, we would love to connect with you on this one. I can say definitely, but bring on the conversation and communication. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you. All right. So as I said, we are at time. So like really quick, what's next, right? So you attended this webinar. We are really excited to have you with us here. So during the next 24 hours, you will receive email with the webinar recording, slides, educator evaluation process rubric that Melissa mentioned earlier. So you could refer to it at a later time. Also, we would love if you share it with your colleagues. We do have training resources, a lot of useful information on our website. Please do read our blog, do check our website for more information. And let's connect. If you would like to explore what, how our system, our platform would help you to, make your evaluation process, your engagement processes more streamlined, our team would definitely be happy to discuss the specific use cases with you, and you could get a free personalized consultation. You could see the information here on the slide, how you could reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. And with that, we really, again, appreciated having you here with us today, and have a great day.